Good evening and welcome, everyone. I'm Dana Cunningham, the Dean of the Tisch College of Civic Life. I welcome to our Tisch Solomont Speaker Series event with legendary civil rights leader Bishop William J. Barber II. It is truly an honor to welcome him to this campus. Before we get started, I want to thank all of the people who are responsible for bringing this event together. Our event co-hosts, the University Chaplaincy, Reverend Elise Winger, and the Africana Center, Director Katrina Moore, co-sponsoring this event, the Political Science Department, Tufts Democrats, and the Civic Studies Program. Your collaboration, along with support and leadership of Susan and Alan Solomont, who have endowed this speaker series, make opportunities like this one possible. Thank you to the many people who are watching online our live stream, including members of the Tufts community across the country. This spring, Tisch College has centered our speaker series events around the idea of citizen activism, welcoming a diverse group of leaders from across a range of fields and experiences to campus who are advocates for change within their communities and beyond, and Bishop Barber fully embodies this theme. Bishop Barber has dedicated his life and career to community activism and organizing, focusing on combating economic and racial injustice. Dr. Cornel West once said, "William Barber is the closest person we have to Martin Luther King Jr. in our midst." Bishop Barber serves as founder and president of Repairers of the Breach, which he launched to train communities in moral movement building. Really important idea, moral movement building. Bishop Barber is also the architect of the Forward Together Moral Monday movement that gained national acclaim in 2013 with its Moral Monday protests. He has given keynote addresses at hundreds of national and state conferences, including the 2016 Democratic National Convention and the homily at the 59th inaugural prayer service for President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. He is a pastor of Greenleaf Christian Church in North Carolina, where he has preached for 30 years. And he is a 2018 MacArthur Foundation Genius Award recipient. Today, he is a professor in the practice at and founding director of the newly established Center for Public Theology and Public Policy at Yale Divinity School. Bishop Barber may be best known for his work as co-chair and leader of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, which is a modern resurgence of the 1968 Poor People's Campaign organized by the Southern Christian Leadership Conference under the leadership of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. On a personal note, I'm tremendously honored to call Bishop Barber a friend. When I first met Bishop Barber, North Carolina was a solidly Tea Party, highly polarized state that was feeding on the politics of resentment. Everyone thought that that stranglehold was unshakable, not Bishop Barber. He said Moral Mondays was a call for moral revival from the underside of history, to build a broad fusion movement to serve the nation's 140 million poor people. It was a message of love and compassion and justice for all of North Carolina's and then the nation's dispossessed. He took the message to poor Black and brown people and also to poor white people who many thought could not hear his message. He built the largest march in North Carolina history because he included everyone, 80,000 Latino, white, Muslim, Jewish, LGBTQ, Black people. And they heard him. Today's Moral Monday Poor People's Campaign is a growing national movement organized to challenge the interlocking issues of systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, and the distorted moral narratives of religious nationalism. Bishop Barber will give a lecture, and later he will be joined by Tufts change of plans. He will be joined by the Tufts University chaplain, Reverend Nelson Winger, and director of the Africana Center, Katrina Moore, for Q&A with the audience. Before I welcome him to the podium, let's watch a short 4-minute video about Bishop Barber's work with the Poor People's Campaign and some of the people who have added their voices and stories to the fight.
I worked 41 years in the coal mines. I have black lung, and it's just unfathomable what these poor coal miners have to go through in order to get what they have worked for and deserve.
At one time, poverty was a temporary condition. You were on a down slope for a minute, but you could bounce back up. We can't bounce back up today. It's permanent. We're not going back to the factory and building cars and trucks like we once did.
A job working at McDonald's or the grocery store doesn't pay enough for one person to live.
We work a 40-hour work week, still not enough. Living from paycheck to paycheck. Rent is $600 a month. We got water bill, electricity. I do this for my kids, and it hurts.
I'm 46 years old. I've lived in poverty here in West Virginia every day of my life. And I'm working. I am working poor with a bachelor's degree. I'm doing the best I can with what I have.
We were in the height of mass water shutoffs. This entire neighborhood was shut off all at one time.
I saw all my neighbors get shut off right in front of me. It was kind of terrifying.
I'm 42 years old, and I'm a cashier at McDonald's. I had lost my house. You're welcome to come inside. There's a lot of people that are living in their cars. You never notice until you're in the same situation.
I don't have stuff to give my children. I'm paying all these bills, and they need school clothes and stuff. They be asking me for, I can't give it to them.
Now I'm a Kansas farmer's wife. Kansas farmers are committing suicide. Why? They're usually in debt up to their eyeballs.
I see poverty in my own community. You know, there's a 70% unemployment rate in the reservation right now.
Here in New York City, we're home to millionaires and billionaires, and we have so many people living in the street, and that's just not right.
I've been a homeless veteran twice, lived in a shelter.
I've been living down here since I was 17.
My only chance of going to college was joining the Army. We are demanding that we stop the war on our poor.
700,000 people in this country are on the verge of losing their food stamps.
This budget calls for shrinking the social safety net programs like Medicare.
I just know that everything that's happening to us isn't right.
I'm in stage 5 of kidney disease. I fell behind on my health care, and they canceled my health insurance, and they told me I have to wait until open enrollment. There's only 5 stages of kidney disease, and I'm in the 5th stage. Murder, it's murder. You know, if you ask me, it's murder.
I lost a son to gun violence, and I lost a daughter.
No parent should have, in America, should have to bury their child for a lack of medicated space.
I'm wailing because my children,
my God,
are no more.
My God, Kevin.
Well, I'm wailing, y'all. Wailing, because my babies ain't no more. How many more babies? How many more children?
No more.
Together until humanity is respected and children are protected and civil rights and labor rights and human rights are never neglected. Let us be together.
Please join me in welcoming Bishop Barber.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't often know, when I look at that video, I never get used to it. Whether to get up and just start crying, or to start cursing, or to just start marching. And that's why I probably do a little of all three. We've got serious work to do in this country. Somebody could bring the lights up a little bit. I'm honored, Dana, to be here with you. And I take this moment very seriously. I want to welcome all of the members of the Poor People's Campaign Coordinating Committee in Massachusetts and who are here today, and invite all of you to be a part. You all got that number, that text number we use? But you can simply go to poorpeoplescampaign.org and sign up. You don't have to come to all the meetings. We're a campaign, we're not another organization. We have enough organizations. We don't need another organization. What we are a mobilizing campaign. And so people don't have to go to meetings and all those kind of things. We have what we call an action network. Folk that want to be there when we're in the face of the legislators, and be there to put bodies in the street when we are pushing policies, and be there when we're mobilizing voters. And so you can do that by just going to www.poorpeoplescampaign.org, or go to www.repairers-of-the-breach. The campaign here in Massachusetts is so powerful, so strong. I knew they'd be here. I knew they would. And we just love you, and I thank God for you. I also want you to know, Dana, this is the 10th anniversary of the Poor People's of the North Carolina Moral Mondays movement. 10th anniversary next week. Somebody once said to me, so y'all just march every Monday. I said, see, that's how silly you are. We were building a movement that started with 17 people going into the state legislature to challenge a supermajority regressive group of extremists who had won because of racialized gerrymandering that the Justice Department allowed to go through before the Voting Rights Act was gutted. Let that sit with you for a minute. We ended up beating them 6 years later, and the court said that it was racist, that it was unconstitutionally constituting a legislature, but for political reasons. The Justice Department let that thing go through. And what it did was it produced in North Carolina this supermajority. But we knew that we had to first dramatize what was going on, but we couldn't just do that, couldn't just be one day. And so we started with the moral framework of the Constitution and our sacred scriptures. In fact, I got arrested for praying too loud. I got arrested for holding a political statement, and when we went to court, the lawyer asked me, why was I holding a political statement? I said, I was holding a passage of scripture. And he said, no, they said you were holding a political. I said, well, look, can I say what I mean? It says, woe unto you who legislate evil and rob the poor of their right and make women and children their prey. He said, that's not a scripture. I said, yes, it is, Isaiah 10. And we were arrested for that, but people came back. The first person arrested was a woman in a wheelchair with cerebral palsy who had health care, who said, I'm getting arrested because I can't live with health care while I know 500,000 other people are being denied because of refusal to expand Medicaid. And we went on, by the end of the summer, over 1,200 people, the largest sustained movement in state capitals in the history of the country. Over 100,000 people in February. The next year, we continued, but we also had a voting registration strategy because we knew, thank you for the right there, if we registered 10% of the unregistered voters, they could fundamentally shift the electorate in North Carolina. We also had a legal strategy. We sued them on everything we marched about in the street. We took under the microscope of the Constitution, and we sued them under the state Constitution and under the federal Constitution. And we went all over, not just in the black community, but 60% of the people that got arrested were white in the South. We had 16% of the folk that marched with us were Republicans, but they were Theodore Roosevelt Republicans, Abraham Lincoln Republicans. That's a different set of Republicans. And by the next election, the governor lost. The only incumbent Tea Party extremist governor in the South lost. They lost the AG, they lost the Secretary of State, they lost the supermajority in the House. they lost the Supreme Court. We became the only Supreme Court in the South that became progressive in the South. But it didn't happen overnight. The 10th year anniversary is next week, and we're going right back to the streets again because what we've seen is a backlash against many of the things that we won. And we've got to still keep working. So, but I also want to just greet you on behalf of my co-chair, Reverend Dr. Leah Steele Harris, and also on the memory of the welfare rights women and Mary Wright Elderman, who really were the ones that pushed Martin to the Poor People's Campaign. It was the women, the welfare rights women that said, you got to do something. Because the truth of the matter is, once Martin went to Riverside and connected racism, poverty, militarism, almost every black organization left him. They wrote resolutions against him. Go check the record. NAACP, Urban League, his own staff. Many, quote unquote, liberal whites went against him because they said, you can't criticize the country right now because we're in war, except for the peace folk who they call really radical. So he lost his open invitation to the White House. We need to know this history. But what he was calling for in '67, I believe, that we need today is a moral Pentecost. A moral Pentecost. In the Bible, and I found out I'm on safe ground, Chaplain, to be here because of Christian universalism, the roots here at Tufts, and the activism here, to quote a scripture. And it says, when the Feast of Pentecost came together, they were in one place. Without warning, there was a sound like strong wind. No one could tell where it came from. It filled the whole building. And then like wildfire, the Holy Spirit spread throughout the ranks. And they started speaking in a number of different languages as the Spirit prompted them. I want to talk about why we need a political Pentecost and a moral third reconstruction. Now, this simple passage of Scripture is not just some folk getting together feeling good. It is how the people survived after the crucifixion of Jesus in the face of an empire that would kill you if you challenged its policies. This is what this is about. And every year, Christians remember this as the beginning of the liberation movement of Jesus. What happened after Jesus, if you will? What happened afterwards? And I want to suggest that this text has a broader application in this moment because America is in a deep need of a political Pentecost. We are in a crisis of civilization, a crisis, a moral crisis. And we need to learn how to speak in other tongues. Now, I know speaking in tongues to bring up this here at this institution might seem strange, but stay with me for just a moment, because if this is right, speaking and hearing new languages and new cultures and new pain and new experiences is exactly what we need to build a movement. When I did my doctoral work, part of it in pastoral care, I had to spend time with a forensic scientist. And I never forgot when he taught us this: wounds speak. You can sometimes tell who murdered a person by studying the wound, because the wound will talk. People's wounds talk. And one of the things we need to hear in the society are the wounds. What was that man really saying up there when he said, I'm a coal miner, and I lost everything? What did that woman mean when she said, there was a time you could get up from poverty, but now you don't get up? What did that woman say? I'm wailing, y'all. I'm wailing. My children are no more. Because she lives in a state that has refused to expand Medicaid. Pentecost, in some ways, a moral Pentecost, is not simply a next chapter in an evolving story, but it is about we need a moral interruption, a transformation. Thomas Kahn called it a paradigm shift. Brother Malcolm Gladwell has written about it, called it a tipping point. Even the founders of this nation, in their failure, talked about it as revolution. We talk about it as liberation. My grandmama said, when the Lord comes, and you get what you call the can't help it's, and you have to stand up against injustice, whatever you call it. There are times in every era when a deep moral crisis demands that the way we have formed things, the way we have listened to each other, the way we have moved together is insufficient. We face such a moment now. Our silos will not deliver us from this. Black people getting over here in their corner, white people in their corner, people who want health care in their corner, people who fight for the LGBT community in their corner, people over here that believe in living wages in their corner. The corners are actually now being used by the extremists to keep us apart. And if you read history, whenever there's been a fundamental change, somehow you got Harriet Tubman and William Lloyd Garrison in the same room. Whenever there's fundamental change, somehow you got Rabbi Heschel and Dr. King and Viola Woosa, a white woman from Michigan, and Fannie Lou Hamer in the same room. Somehow that has to happen. That's the kind of Pentecost. And we've seen it before. After the Civil War tore this nation in two, there was a movement called Reconstruction. And it was an attempt to implement policies that would recognize African Americans as full citizens in slavery and would give everybody the right to vote. But what we often miss about the Reconstruction, even though its promises weren't fulfilled because it was murdered and assassinated and killed, the fact of the matter is, down south, by 1868, former slaves and former free people and poor white folk were in alliance together politically. I mean, deep alliances. By 1872, black and white alliances had taken over every Southern legislature in the South. Every one of them. Black and white alliances in the South. By 1868, 1872, all of the Southern legislatures had rewritten their constitution. In North Carolina, it was a black man named J.W. Hood who became the president of Livingstone University and the bishop in the AME Zion Church, and he connected with a white congregationalist from Ohio who had stopped by Oberlin. And y'all do know the history of Oberlin. 1832, Oberlin, if you went to Oberlin, you had to get accepted into college and be part of the abolition movement, or you couldn't go there. Charles Swinney, in the Second Revival, Great Awakening, said when you came down the place to give your life to Christ, you can only claim you're saved if you give your life to Jesus and your life to the abolition movement. 1832. And he was white. So by 1868, constitutions are rewritten. Let me give you, if I can pull it out of my hard drive, what the preamble of the Constitution sounds like in North Carolina when one white man and one black man, both preachers, apply the moral principles of the Scripture and the moral principles of our U.S. Declaration of Independence to their process of writing the preamble. This is what it says. We hold these truths, this is 1868, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all persons, all persons are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the enjoyment of the fruit of their own labor. See the difference? And the pursuit of happiness. Article 1 in the section on rights. Every person, not child, has a right to a full quality education. It's 1868. Article 11, section 4. Beneficent provision to the poor, the unfortunate, and the orphan is the first duty of a civilized and Christian state. This is constitutional language in 1868. But it didn't come about until languages came together, people came together, and figured out that racism and the residuals of slavery were hurting both black and white. Now, Reconstruction, as you know, was destroyed. How was it destroyed? By 1875, the U.S. had a law that made all racism systemic racism a federal offense, a felony, by 1875. By 1883, it was taken off the books by the Supreme Court after the selection of 1877, when a president was selected, didn't win the popular vote, but was selected, and in being selected, cut a deal. His name was Rutherford B. Hayes. He cut a deal with the Southern races that if they selected him and gave him their electoral votes, he would pull the troops out of the South. And he would appoint people to the Supreme Court that would overturn the civil rights legislation. No wonder Dr. King said 100 years later. What he was really saying was, he didn't say it like this because Dr. King was more poetic than that. What he really was saying, the March on Washington, was 100 years later. Why in the hell are we still here? I thought we dealt with this in 1875. Then you had murder and killing. 1896, you have Plessy versus Ferguson. There was, and by the way, there was only one Supreme Court justice that voted against Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. You know who he was? One. Guess where he was from? Guess. Guess. Take a guess. Take a guess. Boston, right? Massachusetts, right? New York, right? Huh? Eastern Kentucky. Harlan County. That Lyndon Baines Johnson would later go there and launch the war on poverty. Harlan County, USA. His name was Justice Harlan. They called him the Great Dissenter. He dissented in the 1883 overturning of the Civil Rights Law, and he dissented against Plessy versus Ferguson. And Charles Hamilton Houston built his legal theories off of the thinking of a white boy from Eastern Kentucky. We don't know this history. We live in silos. December 10th, 1898, the Wilmington riots happened. The only coup d'etat of its kind in this country, way before January 6th. When duly elected, you know what I'm talking about, when duly elected black and white politicians were run out of office. The black newspaper was burnt. The black newspaper was owned by the mulatto, out-of-wedlock child of the governor by a black woman. They prayed over the insurrection in the churches. This stuff we're saying is not new. They prayed over the insurrection in the church that Sunday. They brought a Gatling gun to Wilmington. Wilmington was 50% black, white. The wealthiest people in North Carolina, the wealthiest man was black, and the closest port to Africa was Wilmington. And all of that was under control of a black-white progressive coalition. And by December 11th, it was all murdered away. What would Wilmington have become if that hadn't happened? And then, after that killing, 3 to 5% of the city of Wilmington was murdered. That's more people killed per capita than on 9/11. And then, 1902, the last black legislator from the South, last black one is put out. And we don't see another black congressperson from North Carolina until 1990. That's why Reconstruction ended. It didn't just stop. It was murder. Then you have another period called the Second Reconstruction. Some people list that as starting when black folks started coming back from World War II, the Brown decision in 1954, when, by the way, it was black and white and Jewish lawyers that had built the theory, and women that we don't often talk about, who were key to developing the theory. Thurgood Marshall got the credit, but it was a lot of women in that room. Their brilliant minds were in that room figuring it out. And have you ever read his closing argument? It sounds just like a preacher. It doesn't sound like he makes the legal argument, but on the last day, he goes to a moral, deep, heavy moral argument. And one of the members of the Supreme Court in that day was a former Grand Wizard of the KKK. And he votes to overturn Plessy. You know, and the Brown decision was a miracle in a sense because Chief Justice Warren was so mean toward the Chinese people that they didn't think he'd ever come around on the issue of race. So 1954 begins the modern second Reconstruction, lasts to about 1968. And during that period of time, we see Social Security expanded. Because you know when Social Security was first passed, if you were in the agrarian culture or a domestic culture, you couldn't qualify. So that means most black folk and 50% of black women didn't qualify when it was first passed in 1935. 1954, that gets opened up. Then you get Medicaid, you get Medicare, you get Emmett Till being killed in 1955 in response to the Brown decision. And Rosa Parks says she saw that. Have you all read Jean Theo Harris's book on Rosa Parks? You need to read that. It's a whole different way of looking at Rosa Parks. If you think she was some little cute little woman that was quiet, you are sadly mistaken. Rosa Parks wouldn't even date a man if he didn't carry a gun with him because she investigated rapes in the South. And she said a black man that didn't carry a gun when he took her out didn't care about her. Now, I'm not promoting violence. I'm just telling you the story, right? But the point is, when Rosa Parks saw Emmett Till's body, she said, you take down one of our babies, we're gonna take down your whole system. That was her response. And two white women and one Jewish sent her to Highlander to learn the tactics of nonviolence long before King was ever there. And there were a whole group of women already in Montgomery who were active. This is second Reconstruction. And there were white women and black women there. That story isn't often told. She sits down, the movement stands up. You get 63, I'm going over a lot of history. You get the Montgomery movement, you get the March on Washington, which, by the way, Diane Nash and her husband didn't go to because they were mad because no women were allowed to speak. I keep mentioning this because, you know, we need to know the whole history. But the march wasn't about black rights. Have you ever read, Bayard Rustin laid out the march? It was for labor rights and minimum wage and education and civil rights. And originally, they were supposed to spend a whole week of nonviolent civil disobedience. But some of the more moderate black organizations said, let's don't do that. But they came. 64 Civil Rights Act, 65 Voting Rights Act. Second Reconstruction is working. And then I'm gonna talk about in a minute something that happened as a backlash to that is still affecting us today. My argument to you is, if you know this history, you understand why I say we need a moral Pentecost and a third Reconstruction today. And there are 4 real basic reasons. Number one, when we look at what's happening today with voter suppression, and I don't look at voter suppression through the lens of just black, because when we filed our voter suppression case and won in North Carolina and proved that the voter suppressors were using surgical racism, our plaintiffs were black and white and Latino and preachers and young folk, because what we wanted to show was it might be targeted at black people, but ultimately voter suppression nullifies the democracy itself and has a negative impact on all people. And Mark Elias, one of the leading civil rights lawyers in voting rights cases, says all the time on TV that he learned fresh how to fight for voting rights from North Carolina because we forced him to file a case that talked about how voter suppression creates an impoverished democracy and how you cannot separate the battle for voting rights. You cannot separate voter suppression from healthcare suppression. You cannot separate voter suppression from wage suppression. You cannot separate voter suppression from militarization and the war economy. that you have to understand that those who push for voter suppression are not just after black folk in this particular, they are after suppressing the vote and undermining the vote to keep out people progressive, either black or white or brown, so that they can control who sets policy. And since 2010, we have seen an all-out attack on voting rights. 2 years after Obama was elected. This stuff didn't just start. In fact, in 2013, what's that? 2013, that's 10 years ago, isn't it? 10 years ago, we had the Shelby decision. The Shelby decision gutted the Voting Rights Act, Section 5. Listen, Section 5, without Section 5, white women couldn't be on juries. Without Section 5, states all over the country could pass laws without them first being pre-cleared by the Justice Department. So you gut Section 5, Ruth Bader Ginsburg says, it's like putting up your umbrella in the middle of a rainstorm. Now, when Section 5 was gutted in North Carolina, one of our state senators says, now that the headache has been removed, we can do what we want to do. And they passed the worst voter suppression laws we had seen since Jim Crow. And they knew, and this is why they did that, because they know that in this country now, there's not a state in the South, in fact, there's not a state in the country where poor and low-wealth people don't make up at least 30% of the electorate. Watch me now. There's not a state in this country where poor and low-wealth people, there's not a battleground state where the margin of victory is within 3% in the presidential election that poor and low-wealth people don't make up 40% of the electorate. When you go deeper, you find out that there's not a state where if 20% of poor and low-wealth voters were organized in a voting bloc around addressing LGBT issues, living wages, and health care, that 20% of the 20% of the 100% that has not participated, and most poor folk don't vote, not because of voter suppression, because they don't hear anybody, politicians included, talking about their issues. When's the last time you heard a presidential campaign debate on poverty? Even though we got 140 million people living in poverty, 43% of the nation, 52%. When's the last time you heard a presidential debate on that, or a senator's debate? So most people feel like nobody cares, but if you could go in and help build a movement, like we did, for instance, in Kentucky. Brashear, who's the governor in Kentucky now, who beat an incumbent, beat him because black and white folk from Louisville and Harlan County came together and organized a movement. They know this. Did you know? I'll give you some numbers. I won't be long now. What do you think it would take a poor and low-wealth voters in Michigan to determine who sits in the presidency, the governorship in Michigan? 1%. About North Carolina, 19%. About Georgia, 7%. About Florida, everybody talking about DeSantis, 4%. That's all. 4% of poor and low-wealth voters who are already registered, who haven't voted, organized around an agenda about their issues would outdistance any margin of victory, because DeSantis didn't win but by 1.7%. Now you say, Reverend Bob, why are you talking about this? We got to have a moral political Pentecost to bring people together, because Dr. King, at the end of the Selma to Montgomery March, told us something that far too often we have not heard. I actually think that Dr. King's greatest speech was the one he gave on the steps of the Alabama State House. I think his greatest closing was I Have a Dream. But all preachers got a closing. And if y'all know, you see why they laughing? They know. Martin, I Have a Dream, he used that same clothing in Detroit 3 weeks earlier. He used that same closing in North Carolina. It just was different that day, and he shortened it some. But his greatest speech, to me, was when he stood on the steps of the Alabama State House and walked the people through the first Reconstruction movement, and then said, the reason segregation exists and the reason there's so much fight against the voter participation is because the greatest fear of the Southern aristocracy is for the masses of poor Negroes and the masses of poor white folk to come together and form a voting bloc that could fundamentally shift the economic architecture of the nation. Said that in 1965. And one of the things, we got to have a movement that will help the aristocracy's fear be realized. Last two things, we'll deal with some questions. We need a moral Pentecost because, as I said, of poverty and the denial of living wages, denial of health care, and the continuing reality of the worst enemy to progress, which are moderates. Watch it, Barber. Now, I'm not the only one that said that. Martin said that from the Birmingham jail. He said the greatest enemy to the civil rights movement was not the racists and the KKK. He said it was moderates, political moderates, who love order more than they love justice. Right now in America, we have not raised the minimum wage for over 10 years. 14 years. Right here in in Massachusetts, a so-called liberal state, there are 1 million people who work in Massachusetts who make less than $15 an hour. And working at the state's minimum wage in Massachusetts, you have to work 113 hours a week just to afford a basic 2-bedroom apartment and maybe eat meat once a week. Even in Massachusetts, there are 183,000 people who are uninsured. In America, there are 55 million people who make less than a living wage. And during COVID, we changed their name from service workers to essential worker. We forced them to go to work, but did not treat them like they were meaningful because we did not raise their wages. But we put them on the front line. So poor people during COVID died at a rate 3 to 5 times higher than anybody else, not because COVID discriminated, but because the deliverance of policies, of provisions and services were discriminated by us, and we created more billionaires during COVID than ever before, while the poor died. 87 million people are either uninsured or underinsured. 37 million are uninsured. We're the only of the wealthiest 25 countries in the world that does not offer some form of universal health care. That's why we have to have a moral Pentecost to fight for universal health care. Of the 1 million people that died during COVID so far, 330,000 died because of the lack of health care. They didn't die. They should be here, Reverend. I had to admit a few years ago that I had lied over people when I buried them. And it broke my heart, Dana, that I had stood up before families and said, God called your daughter home to be with him. It's a damn lie. Policy murder killed them. And I swore I would never again be a pastor that pastors people in their pain and in their grief and not be in the street fighting against the thing that's causing their grief in the first place. You got to. But it's worse than the statistics because, okay, we have a president, and I love a lot of things they've done. I did the inaugural sermon. President, vice president, they run on living wages. Democrats put it in their agenda. They put it right there. I was there when they wrote it in the platform. We're going to fight for health care. We're going to expand it. We're going to do living wages, $15 an hour. We're going to pass voting rights. Then they get elected. Both houses. Presidency. Well, right after January 6th, when the nation was primed, it's the right time to put voting rights forward. Well, let's do infrastructure first. Let's deal with the wealthy first, primarily. And so 2 years later, no voting rights. 2 years later, 50 Republicans and 2 Democrats blocked living wages that would have lifted 55 million Americans out of poverty and would have lifted 41% of black folk out of poverty. You talk about a racist vote. That's a racist vote. Huh? And they tell us the reason they didn't pass it is because if you raise wages, you create inflation. And they argue that if you want to stop inflation, you got to be for wage reduction. What a lie. What a lie. Inflation is being caused by this pandemic, by the war. Same thing that happened in 1919, 1920, when we had another pandemic. People making enough money does not cause inflation. The wealthy and the producers of the culture holding back their products and driving up prices in order to get more money, that's what causes inflation, among other things. And so we've got to have a moral Pentecost that puts a face on these issues, that drives them home, that says something is wrong in our society. You know, we look at what's going on, and I keep telling folks, Trump is not the problem. Trump is like this stuff running out my nose, the symptom. That's all he is. Huh? And if you got Trumpism and Trumpitis, you're missing it. If you think see, because he's out of office, guess what's going on? The same stuff. Why is that? Because Trump was planned. What? Yeah, all this division was planned. Toward the end of the Second Reconstruction, a group of folk got in a room with Richard Nixon and said, we know how to win. We have to engage in something called positive polarization. Read Jonathan Shell's book, A Time of Illusion. We got to create something called positive polarization. We have to find a way to talk, not sound racist, but be racist, and to split black and white folk from voting together, especially in the South. We've got to do it consistently. And if we get caught doing it, we've got to deny it. Now, if we do it, it may get out of control, because when you create a Frankenstein, he may not, but it's worth the risk. Because if we do it, we can control from Maryland all the way to the Southwest, and then some of the enclaves, ethnic enclaves in places like Boston and New York will also take up this division. And Kevin Phillips was a part of it. Pat Buchanan was a part of it. The names are there. And they did. And they said in 1968, if we do this, we can control at least the presidency and a lot of the states for the next 60 years. This is just the 52nd year. But here's the closing. If it could be planned, it could be unplanned. If it can be done, it can be undone. Huh? And what you saw in North Carolina 10 years ago is the way we undo it. What you're seeing now in Tennessee is one of the ways we done. And don't miss Tennessee. Let me help y'all understand Tennessee. Because Tennessee ain't about 2 black boys. You really have missed it. You really have missed it, if that's what you think it's about. Justin Jones was trained in the Poor People's Campaign. I got his picture. He was trained in the repairs of the breach on fusion politics. Pearson was a part of it when he stood up to fight against the status quo, black and white people who wanted to poison an aquifer in Memphis with a company that wanted to run a pipeline through. And Al Gore and myself went over and stood with them and helped him fight and win. Long before the cameras were there, Justin Jones spent 62 days with white and black students from Vanderbilt and Fisk in front of the state capitol. Y'all didn't hear nothing about that. Demanding Medicaid expansion and calling the denial of Medicaid expansion a form of policy murder. The white lady that's up there is from East Tennessee. She didn't get elected in some great progression. She's from East Tennessee, Gloria. Huh? And she's win. And she put a resolution on the floor 2 years ago that demanded if they were going to honor Dr. King, they had to include the Poor People's Campaign and the values, and the legislature blocked it because it had Poor People's Campaign and militarism and those things in it. That's who they are. And they're not two blacks, and she's one. I heard some black person say, well, you got two black people and the white woman is ancillary. No, what you are seeing is Reconstruction. Justin Jones's district, the high school in his district, has 62 languages. He wasn't elected in a predominantly black district as we think about it. Don't let your eyes fool you. Don't bring these old tired, worn out race analysis to this fight. Look again, it's Pentecost. Did you hear them every time they wanted, well, what do you feel about being excluded? Oh, they didn't exclude us. They were trying to expel the voices of children crying from the grave. Notice their language. They were trying to expel the voices of the people, the 70,000 people we represent. Well, Justin, how do you feel about them putting you out? It's not about me. It's about Reconstruction. Have you heard him? He said, third Reconstruction. You heard him? He keeps saying it. He keeps saying it. Both of them. Third Reconstruction. Gloria said third Reconstruction. They know the history of Tennessee. They know the history of the South. They know that 900,000 people in Tennessee didn't vote. They know that if 22% of poor and low wealth Tennesseans start voting, they can send the governor home. They can change the makeup of that state house. What you are seeing, and it's breaking out in Mississippi, in Jackson, it's gonna break out in Florida, it's breaking out again in North Carolina. It is a mighty moral wind that is blowing. That's why we decided we're gonna do Moral Monday in Tennessee Monday. Somebody said, well, why did you wait till after they got put back in? We knew what we were doing. We're going down there to say just them getting back in is not enough. Passing gun law is when the victory will be held. Passing Medicaid expansion is when the victory will be full. Passing living wages is when the victory will be full. So clergy are going in full vestment on Monday, and we're going right inside of the legislature to say that Justin and Gloria, y'all don't have to ever get arrested again. You do the work on the inside. We're going to shake the trees on the outside. We'll go and get arrested. And we're going black and white and gay and straight and trans and Unitarian and Baptist and Pentecostal and Lutheran and non-denominational. We're going because there is something happening. And the only way this country is going to be saved is for there to be a moral Pentecost where the rejected come together. Can I sit down? I've been here too long. But there's one more text. It's one in the Jewish. My Jewish rabbis know it. It's Psalm 118. It says, the stone that the builders rejected have become the chief cornerstone. And this is the Lord's doing. How many of you know what it's like to be rejected because of your race? Or rejected because of your income? Where you at? Or rejected because of who you love, where you are. Or rejected because you didn't have health care, where are you? Or rejected because you're poor, where are you? Well, the key to the transformation in this country is for all the rejected to come together. Because whenever the rejected get on one accord, then God assists the rejected. And the rejected every time are the ones that lead the revival. When a rejected Harriet Tubman and a Candace Staten and a Frederick Douglass and a William Lloyd Garrison got together, change came. When the rejected mothers of South Africa and a white Methodist bishop named Peter Story and a black Anglican named Tutu got together, change came. When a rejected Rosa Parks and a Viola Woosa and a Unitarian named James Reed and a Martin Luther King and a Rabbi Heschel got together, change came.
Every time the rejected come together with a policy agenda of transformation, God assists the rejected. And whenever you see the rejected coming together, I don't know if you're a person of faith, but go ahead and say it anyway. It's all right. This is the Lord's doing. This is the Lord's doing. This is the Lord's doing. Can I preach for 1 minute? They told me in 1993, I'd never walk again. I felt like I was rejected. I went to depression. But when my doctor got together, my children got together, and the prayer warriors got together, and my faith got together, and my hope got together, and I figured out it doesn't matter if you're limping, long as you're limping for justice. I can jump now. I can walk now. Because when the rejected come together, God always has a way. God always has a way. God always has a way. Always has a way.
Bishop Barber, to be in your presence, to hang on your every word, is to know that there is a spirit in this place, the spirit of Sophia, of knowledge, of power, and might. And I pray that we take that spirit with us today, and that we bring it onto this campus, and that we trust your message of this moral Pentecost. I work with a multi-faith chaplaincy team on an incredibly diverse campus, and we are looking for ways to be able to claim this message of liberation and hope and power, because we know that when we hear the Spirit, it is speaking to every single one of us, across our traditions, within our traditions. Thank you for reminding us to trust that, and thank you for your Spirit. I'm going to ask one question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. I get to work with a wonderful group of students at Tufts. They're part of the Interfaith Ambassador team. If you're here, raise your hands. Several of them are here today. And we're asking a lot of questions about what does it mean to be a person of faith, a person with a religious or spiritual or philosophical identity committed to social justice. And what does it mean to be a part of traditions that also have a legacy of religious nationalism? Both in the United States and across the globe, we see this. How can we bring our faith into a multi-faith coalition and be a part of transformation and change and not be complicit in the nationalisms that are so powerful and that use religious language to defend their work and identity? That's a question that we're asking together. What do you have to say?
The empire always has its own prophets and prophetesses and those that attempt to use religion to consecrate and codify injustice. I was in West Virginia one day when we were mobilizing up there in the hills, and I heard an announcement of a politician who said, I'm running on a God agenda, anti-gay, anti-abortion, pro-guns, pro-militarism, pro-tax cuts, and pro-prayer in the school. And one of the things we have to understand is that has always been the case. Whether it was the slave master's religion, that Frederick Douglass said he had to challenge, because he said, because I love the Christianity of Jesus, I must despise the Christianity, the religion, he didn't say Christianity, the religion of the slave master, because he said he knew racism was a religion. He couldn't call it Christianity. Or if you read Kevin Cruz's book called One Nation Under God, where he talks about how during the time of the New Deal, Sun Oil and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce did a study to assess who had the moral authority in the country, who could call the country to stand against the New Deal, because they hated it. You know, they hated what Roosevelt was trying to do, even though there were limits on what he tried to do. Well, when the study came back, it said that churches and pulpits had the moral authority. So then they asked the question, well, how can we take them over? And if you read that book, it'll tell you how they hired a guy out of California who was a Congregationalist, who came up with a distorted theology of Calvinism, and said that he deboned the gospel, he deboned the scriptures to make it palatable to the billionaire. This actually happened. And he said, if you'll give me $10 million, I'll get you 19 or 20,000 pulpits in the next 10 years. And he did. And he went around teaching, if you're good, you go to heaven. If you're bad, you go to hell. If you're good, you will be at least middle class and wealthy. If you're bad, you'll be poor. So the government should not in any way do anything to help you with your poverty, because it undermines you facing the moral punishment you should face for your lack of effort. That's real. So I want to say, first of all, to your students, you're right to want to take it on. You better, because it's out here, and it doesn't sleep. But just like that tradition's out here, there are other traditions. It's the tradition in the Bible of Moses. It's the tradition of Miriam. It's the tradition of Esther. It's the tradition of Isaiah and Micah and Amos. It's the tradition of Jesus, who starts his ministry saying, I've come to preach good news to the poor, the Patokos, the P-T-C-H-O-S, those who have been made poor by economic exploitation. It's the tradition of Pentecost. It's the tradition of some of the early church that took on the Roman Empire, even when they got crucified and burned at the stake. It's the tradition of the abolition movement. It's the tradition of the social gospel movement born up here in the North. Walter Rauschenbusch, you know, when that question was first asked, what would Jesus do? It wasn't about personal salvation, it was about social responsibility. What would Jesus do if he saw children walking around with 3 fingers because there's no child labor law? What would Jesus do if he saw people falling out dead because there's no health care? And those questions forced Teddy Roosevelt in his 1912 Bull speech to lay out 5 things that ought to be a part of a moral agenda that have nothing to do with politics: health care, minimum wage, protecting the environment, getting money out of politics, right, and protecting voting rights. And it also forced Frances Perkins to go into politics with Franklin Roosevelt as the first female labor secretary, and said to him, I have come to bring my faith to the policies of labor. And it's because of her that we get many of the things that happened in the New Deal and labor movement. It's the tradition of the suffrage movement that was deeply religious. It's the tradition of Mother Jones out of West Virginia, the coal miner woman, the former teacher who took on injustice because of her faith. So what I say to them is, first, know the different traditions. That's what I'm actually teaching now at Yale is yes, there have been these other traditions, but so have there been these progressive and liberal and revolutionary traditions. Grab them, hold on to them, don't give them up. Lastly, you know, find your way into movements today if you're interested in moral movement. That's why we invite people to be a part of the Poor People's Campaign or Repairs of the Breach. Movements that are not just looking at things through the narrow lens of left versus right, Democrat versus Republican. And the truth of the matter is, that's okay, but it's too puny sometimes. It disallows our ability to build unlikely coalitions. One of the things, I'm not promoting my book, but in the book, Third Reconstruction, I lay out 14 things that we have learned in a moral movement that need to be applied today if we're talking about building moral movements. And then lastly, we don't always start combating these, coming together because we want to. It's a strange thing about pain. See, there are times in culture where the empire pushes too far and it forces people to come together. That's what happened Pentecost. They pushed too far. There are times when people find themselves in so much hurt that they have to come together. I'll tell you a quick story. I was up in eastern Kentucky, mobilizing, and we went there in the middle of the day, and some folk told me, said, Rembar, if you go up there, they're gonna kill you. I said, that's God, just hush. You can die anywhere. And so we went up there, and about 400 people showed up. And they said, and people had said, this is Trump country, but I found that it wasn't Trump country. It was people up there. And we started talking about the 5 interlocking injustices: systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, denial of health care, the war economy, the false moral narrative, religious nationalism. And then we put up a list of their legislature and showed where their legislators voted on each of those issues and where they voted on labor rights and water rights. So there was a guy in the back of the room named McCoy. He was actually a McCoy, like the Hatfields in McCoy. He said, my name is McCoy. I said, oh, Lord. He said, Reverend, put that back up there. I said, what? That chart. I said, okay. He said, now go over that again. And I said, well, this legislature that you all elected, they tell you they're against voting rights. They tell you they're against gay people, but did they also tell you they're against union rights? Did they tell you that? He said, well, I will be damned if we ain't being played against each other. I said, but what you gonna do about it? And he said, Pastor, my grandmama was a person of faith, and she said there are times you just got to stand up. I said, let's talk about that. Because my grandma said the same thing. You see, and so the pain of the moment forced us into conversation. This is a painful moment. And every painful, hurtful moment where there are wounds and breakages, there are also openings. There are also openings. There are also places where people have been so battered that they just might consider holding one another and coming together. I think that we're in one of those moments. I've had more young people coming up wanting to be a part of this movement and part of saying it doesn't have to be like this. The special rapporteur at UN, I was at the UN, Dana, and we were talking about the issue of poverty. I was meeting with the special rapporteur on extreme poverty. And as I was leaving, he said, Bishop, can I be honest? And I said, yeah. He said, I'm not a person of faith, per se. But we got 3 lies going on. We got 3 big problems. He said, first, the lie of scarcity. He said, there is no scarcity of resources. That's just a bold-faced lie. He said, people start there because they don't want to deal with the reality, the real question. Not how much does it cost to fix these problems, but how much does it cost not to fix them, which is Joseph Stiglitz's question, the Nobel Peace Prize economist. He said, we also don't have a scarcity of solutions. We know, we know how to fix poverty. Look at what all we did, child tax credit dropped poverty among children 60%. Then we turn around and quit. I mean, we know what to do. He said, but what we do have, he said, and I didn't think I would ever find myself saying this, is we do have a crisis of moral consciousness. And I said, let's talk. Now, he said he wasn't a person of faith, but and I wasn't trying to convince him to be a person of faith. The pain of what he saw in his report caused an opening, right? When I was in Dana's class, she don't know, I remember this. When I was in her class, she taught me? And she taught me I was one of her Mel King fellows at MIT. And she brought this guy in named Otto Schwammer one day, and he was teaching us this U principle, V principle, how you go into the future and you imagine what is, and then you work backwards. But in the midst of that, Otto Schwammer said, I was sitting up that day, I wasn't paying a lot of attention because I was thinking about something else. And he said, we have a problem in our economic systems. It's called consciousness. And I said, wait a minute, did I just hear religious language at MIT? And I raised my hand. I said, say that again. He said, what? I said, what you just said. He said, we have a problem in our economic systems called conscious, the failure to realize that we're all interconnected. I said, Ezekiel 22. He said, what? I said, the land is full of injustice because your politicians have become like wolves. They tear the people apart. And your priests are worse than the politicians because they tell them it's okay. Now, he wasn't, you see, in that moment when we were talking about something very painful, it created a moral opening for a different kind of conversation and a recognition that it's not about whether you're Christian or Muslim or Jewish. The recognition is that if we do not have a moral shifting, a paradigm shifting, a moral, you can call it the arc of the universe, that being, whatever you want to call it, which was the Unitarian statement, it wasn't Dr. King's statement, we are in trouble because just talking about this stuff as just Democrat versus Republican and Northern versus South is too puny for the pain that we face. Yeah, and this generation has a marvelous opportunity. I think they have the best opportunity to come at.
Is there a question from students that you would like to ask tonight?
Yes, sir. There's one right there. Uh-oh, he brought his whole notebook. oh, Lord.
Good evening. First of all, thank you for being here. I really appreciate you coming to speak with us here at Tufts University. I'm Khalil Bentley. I'm a second-year graduate student here at Tufts University, specifically our School of Global Affairs.
Is it public affairs?
Global affairs.
Great, internationalism, okay.
I wanted to know if you had any comment. This is a little bit different, but I wanted to know if you had any comment on the protests in Atlanta against the new $90 million police academy, aka Cop City, being constructed in a historical black neighborhood. Do you have any words?
Yeah, wherever that's happening. Whether it's the attempt to create an all-white district in Jackson, whether it's the attempt to build $1 million jail facilities in the middle of black communities in a state that still has not passed Medicaid expansion. And thousands of people are dying in a state that still doesn't have a living wage. Wherever you see this, it's our values are all just way off. You know, it comes out of the same moral inconsistency that says more guns will equal safety, more jails will equal safety, more, you know, well, at least you're building jobs. Well, we can find something else to build to give people jobs other than just building more jails. It also reinforces that you put the jail where the problem is, which then identifies the problem in the black community or minority community, which is actually not true when you look at the statistics. You know, just like we found out, for instance, I remember when we started doing the statistics on poverty. I hope you all will get the Souls of Poor Folk, Auditing America, 50 years after the Poor People's Campaign that we produced, and the report called The Awakening of the Sleeping Giant. Now, one of the things our movement does is we produce academic reports because one of our principles is the worst thing you can do is be loud and wrong, and so you got to have academics and academy. Academics and activism have to be together. And so, my brother, you know, when you think about when we started dealing with poverty, I can remember when I was in a room with some black folk, and they said, they said, well, 60% of black people are poor and are low wealth. And I said, but what is that percentage or raw numbers? They said, Reverend Bob, don't mess with that. I said, what do you mean don't mess with it? They said, because if you look at it through raw numbers, you're going to get a number, and then people then won't deal with black poverty because what you're going to find is in raw number, there are more white people. And I said, no, if we tell the whole story, the truth will force the nation to have to deal with it. So we did. In our studies, we had fights, I mean, literally with academicians that did not want us to disaggregate the numbers. They said if we disaggregated the numbers, it would undercut our movement. I said, well, how is the truth going to undercut anything? So what we did, we said, okay, 60% of black people are poor and low wealth, 68% of Latinos, 30.2% of white. I'm just putting it. And then we flipped it over and did the raw numbers. So 60% of black folk is 26 million. 30% of white people is 66 million in raw numbers, right? Now, what am I talking about? Your question. People, that jail is a metaphor for where the problem is. But if you actually look at the real numbers on crime, maybe in percentage, but not in raw numbers, that's not where the problem is. So we have to challenge the lie, right? So I have a problem anywhere, in any state, where we build great-looking jails that look like hotels while people are living on the street homeless. But I think that we have to challenge that, not just from a partisan perspective, but we have to challenge that with deep moral arguments, and we have to have moral analysis, moral articulation, moral activism and action, and we have to have a moral agenda. Now, today, because of time constraints, I laid out for you some of the problems and did suggest some of the solutions. But you don't do a moral Pentecost and not have answers. So the other side, the second part of this speech, maybe I can come back sometime, is we actually have a third Reconstruction, ending poverty and low wealth agenda, right, where we work through. Because Pentecost, and even in the Bible, they didn't just have a coming together. The first thing they did before they challenged Caesar was they created a community where nobody had any need. They modeled what they were fighting for. You hear what I'm saying? They modeled what they were fighting for, right? And so what we're saying is that we cannot just curse the dog. A moral movement true moral movements can't just say what's wrong. You cannot just say what's wrong. You have to, with love and truth and all of that, have an agenda to not only curse the darkness, but you point to a way around the darkness and a way over the darkness. Prophetic, one writer says like this, prophetic implementation never precedes prophetic imagination. You have to know the data, you have to know the empirical numbers in such a way that it allows you to detach yourself from the lies you have believed as truth. Because the empire fools us all. It gets us all messed up. So you have to study to learn how to unpack the empire's arguments better than the empire can throw them at you. You got to know the other side. Now, I'm going to tell y'all this, and this might sound, when I was in seminary, Dr. William Turner, some of y'all know he's a professor of pneumatology, and we were studying slavery, and development of the black church. He gave us an assignment that made me so hot. He said, everybody in here that's black is going to have to preach before the class a sermon for slavery. I'm like, are you crazy? I'm not going to do that. He said, well, you're going to get an F. And he said, everybody white is going to preach one against slavery. And I wrestled with him. He said, trust me, Barber, just trust me. I'm not trying to hurt you. So I got Cotton Mather's, who was the president of Yale. Way back, never knew I was going to Yale. And Cotton Mather's wrote some of the most powerful treatises, negatively powerful, on slavery. And when I got into it, I started getting into it. You know, my family on my father's side were free blacks, were never slaves, and whites and Tuscarora Indians. I started getting into that thing. And then when I presented it before the class, do you know, many of my white colleagues were crying because for the first time, they heard the lie. But it was so powerful because the lie was coming from somebody that looked like me. And for the first time, I heard the lie at a very deep level. And I understood what Ibram Kendi later put in a book, that race is the child of racism. It's not the other way around. And if you don't understand that, you miss the ism, right? And you miss the structure. And then after we were out of class, Dr. Turner says, son, all I was trying to tell you and show you that if you're going to debate system of injustice, understand that the injustices have not survived being stupid. My grandma used to say it like this, you better beware of the wiles, W-I-L-E-S, of the devil. She said, don't you ever think evil is stupid. It is a fundamental miscalculation that will end up getting you destroyed. You got to take it seriously. It's not ultimate truth, but they know how to make a lie sound like the truth. And so in our movement, part of what we do in the Poor People's Campaign is we teach all the arguments on tax cuts. We teach folks to understand, this is what they're saying, now unpack it, let's unpack it. Let's unpack it. That's what I do in my classes. Let's understand why people are against health care. Don't just say, oh, they're stupid, or they're just ignorant. They are not just stupid and not just ignorant. They are beguiled, they are bamboozled. They are bewitched, if you will, in some ways. They've been mistaught. And who taught us? Carter G. Woodson. Ain't nothing worse than miseducation. What did Carter G. Woodson say about miseducation? It's so powerful that if you teach somebody their place is at the back door, you can build a building with no back doors. They'll go to the front door, look at it, and then go around the back, get them a hammer, and make them a back door. He said, that's how powerful. And if folk can be miseducated about race, they can be miseducated about health care and living wages and voting rights, and they have. And that's really part of the major division in this country. It's not just left and right, it's the misteaching, the level of lie, the level at which lies have been so articulated as the truth. And a moral movement has to take on the lies and realize that some of the people you may actually hate, not hate, I wouldn't use that. That my best friend right now, and I wish he was here tonight, I'll stop at this for y'all. My best friend was trained by Strom Thurmond. He was trained to be Jesse Ham. My brother died of pancreatic cancer. I had to preach his funeral 30 days from after they told me. And I didn't have another brother in the world but Jonathan Hartgrove. Jonathan Hartgrove is a white boy, was raised in Klan country. He was raised to take Strom Thurmond's place. And he said in 1995, he heard me come to an event like this. And he said he heard me preach when I was supposed to be lecturing. And for the first time in his life, he heard the gospel, and he didn't know what to do with it because he had been so lied to. He said it shook him. And he then invited me that day to come do the baccalaureate at his high school. And when he told me, I need you to come to Kings Mountain, I said, son, I'm not coming up there. Because I was the human relations director. I monitored hate crime in North Carolina. I knew where all the militia groups were. I ain't going to Kings Mountain. That's where the Klan burned a cross before they shot Roz's husband. I knew that area. I was not, Dana explained that to y'all later. I wasn't going up there, Dana. He got tears in his eyes. He said, will you please come? I said, okay. And my brother was living then, and I told him to come because my brother wasn't nonviolent. And he was a big boy, 6'5". He was my little brother. He thought he took care of me. And we went up there, and nobody in there that looked like me except my brother, me, and one other person, and a little black Labrador retriever, and he wasn't saying nothing. He was and they just stopped when I walked in the room. And I got up to speak, and it was quiet, and I said, well, I might as well preach. This might be my last time. And so I started talking about the Good Samaritan, and then later on, and then afterwards, John said, I want you to go to the house with me. He said, because you don't need to drive out of here tonight by yourself. And so I went to his house, and we talked. Long story short, I lost track with him sometime. He ended up going to seminary in Pennsylvania and renounced white evangelicalism. He renounced religious nationalism. And when we decided to go to war with Iraq, he said the Spirit told him to get in a car with his wife and drive across Iraq and go to where Sodom, what's the city where Sodom was? What's the city? Wherever it was. Go to Baghdad, find a Muslim family and stay with them during the bombing to prove to them that all Christians didn't hate them. That's where he went. And he stayed there during the bombing. And then he came back and he became a part of a group called New Christian Monasticism. He created a house named it after the place he stayed. And at his house now, he has at least 7 people of different races always staying there. And I happened to read an article, and in the article, he was right. He said, he said, people talk about me going to Iraq, but the day my life was changed was when a black preacher decided to preach the gospel of Jesus that I had been lied about and had never heard. My point being is, we don't know who can be shifted if we would dare to be a part of a moral and political Pentecost in this season.
Thank you, Bishop Barber. I think we've heard the gospel tonight. Thank you. And I want to invite Katrina to offer closing words.
Thank you. This today, Dana, we've been talking about for a really long time. And having you here is like, it brings me back to 2016 when John Lewis came to campus and talked to us and took us to a place where I will never be the same. And so I thank you for taking the time to come, as a colleague texted me and said, and to give us food for our soul. There is so much work that we need to do. And I work with students every day trying to help them understand the power of their voice and that they can't allow themselves to live in a world of hopelessness. We have work to do. I'm really happy to know that you're out there doing this work, and we have to get in line and help and do what we can do to move us to a moral consciousness.
Can I say one thing?
Yes.
Your friend Roz and Liz Theo Harris are organizing the Moral Poverty Action Congress, June 8th, 19th through the 23rd in DC, that will end with a massive resurrection, not an insurrection, on the steps of the Capitol, sitting and laying out the third Reconstruction. I want to extend the invitation to students that you have here to come. If you have 5 students, I can't do them all, I'll pay for them to come. Also, on Monday, we'll be having the Moral Monday in Tennessee. If y'all know people in Tennessee or can get there, start tweeting it out and letting them know. Our team, come in. The Poor People's Campaign is here. Please stop by the desk. Please sign up and you don't just be a part of the Action Network. And then on June, 3rd weekend in June in 2024, we're going to have we had the Moral Poverty Action, the Poor People's Low-Wage Workers Moral Assembly and March to the Polls, June 18th of this past year. Over 100,000 people showed up, 3 million on TV. Now, the major news stations wouldn't cover it. Okay. You understand what I'm saying? We got 381 hits in newspapers. I went to the C-SPAN, and the people at C-SPAN, the staff was crying on Wednesday when they heard what we were going to do, and I got a call Friday, and it went like this: Reverend Barber, they pulled us. For 100 minutes, we heard the most powerful moral voices in this country, impacted people of every race, creed, and color. It was not, we got criticized because we were told you're not supposed to have a national meeting and not let national leaders speak. Y'all are messing the model up. Well, we're going to come back again in June of next year. When y'all hear the sound and you feel the wind and you see the fire pointing toward the mass Poor People's Low Wage Workers Assembly and Moral March on Washington to the Poll on Pennsylvania Avenue. Join it. Join it.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, and good night.